Hey everybody, welcome back to Northwest Small Batch Brewing. My name's Steven, and today we're going to sort of take things a little slower, and I want to talk about styles of brew. Styles of beer. Two main styles of beer, as you probably saw from the description, ales and lagers. And I'm going to end up talking about a couple more varieties that kind of came to mind. Obviously, I can't cover every variety of beer. There's just unbelievable amount, which is fantastic that we have so many options, but it's just too many to talk about. And really, ale and lager are made differently. They're completely sort of different. And so if you're not familiar, then you should watch this video, and we'll talk about the differences and how they're brewed. And then I'll talk about a couple of other varieties that I think sometimes can cause confusion on what they are and how to make them. And we'll go from there. So let's get the intro rolled, and we'll get stuck in. Hey guys, welcome back. So we're going to talk about the two main types of beer. There's so many kinds, but the two that I think you want to think about when you're brewing, like home brewing, because they're just really two separate categories of brewing, is the ale and the lager. So I'm assuming if you're watching this video that you don't know a whole lot about the differences between the two of them. Most people who are at home, especially if you're new, like novice to intermediate or whatever, and even not intermediate, you're probably making an ale. The main reason, in my opinion, you're sticking to ale is because temperature-wise, ale has to be brewed at, like say room temperature, say 68 degrees or whatever. Whereas lagers have to be brewed at a colder temperature, which means you have to have a way to control the temperature of your actual fermenter if you're doing a lager. So right away, that's the main difference between the two. Lagers use lager yeast, which is a whole different kind of yeast that needs to be fermented at colder temperatures. Ale uses warmer temperature yeast. Also, where the yeast flocculates, meaning where it hangs out, is different in each one. Ale is considered top fermenting. That means that it flocculates or gathers at the top of your fermenter, whereas lager yeast gathers or ferments at the bottom of your fermenter. That doesn't really mean a whole lot in the terms of your whole process. It's just, if you're wondering, like one of the main differences between those two yeasts. Obviously, I already said that ale yeast prefers like 68 degrees. Well, let's say as low as 60. So 60 to like, say, 72 degrees Fahrenheit, which is like 15 to 22 Celsius, is for your ales. So on the other hand, lagers need to be fermented in much colder, controlled colder fermentation. So between 40 and 52 degrees. So you're talking at least like 20 degrees colder than an ale, which is like 4.5 to 11 Celsius. So then you get into, how do you control the fermentation? Well, there's different ways you can do it, but they all cost money. So you can buy a refrigerator or like an upright freezer, and you can buy a controller unit that plugs into it and has a temperature probe. And then instead of the refrigerator turning on and off whenever its own probe detects, it's above or below a certain temperature, you just set it to the lowest setting, and then you set your controller to say 68 degrees. And as soon as the inside of your fermentation or your refrigerator is above 68, it's going to turn the refrigerator on and it'll start cooling. And as soon as it gets starts going below 68, it's just going to cut the power. So that's all that it's doing. It's turning the power on and off, on and off, on and off to maintain that temperature that you want. That's probably the primary way most people, control their fermentation. But it means that you have to have space for a refrigerator, and it has to be a refrigerator that's big enough to hold your fermenter. Which is why a lot of people get upright freezers, because they have room for several, Then you have the other option would be like a glycol chiller. That's super popular right now. I don't know why it's super popular, because it is super expensive. I mean, you can spend like $1,000, at least American dollars, or more probably, on a glycol chiller system. It's basically like an air conditioner for your beer. It's like using a liquid called glycol that goes through this machine that chills it down really cold, and then it's sort of like refrigerant, right? And it sends it through a pipe that goes down into your fermentation and back out, and then back through the chiller machine, and cycles. I mean, it works. It's just awfully expensive. There is another way that I'm going to be trying. I just been looking for something. I almost thought I was going to get a refrigerator next year and try that, but I just don't have the space for another refrigerator, and then you're talking more of an expense. So for like half the cost, I already have Anvil fermenters. I know not everybody has those. They're these stainless steel fermenters with spigots. I love them. But it turns out Anvil already makes a temperature-controlled unit. So it's much more simple. All you do, it works the same way as the glycol, but you use ice water instead. So you have a cooler with ice water, and then it goes through it pumps the water through this pump, through these hoses, down through a coil in your fermenter, and then back out, and then goes back, dumps the water back into your cooler where it gets cold again. So it's this, and it also has a controller on it. So it only turns on and starts pumping water if it detects your fermentation is getting too warm. But it does mean that you have to replace the ice, daily, maybe every other day. It depends how good your cooler is at, keeping stuff frozen. But I'm going to give it a try. I think it'll work, especially for summertime here. Let's get back to business. Ale versus lager. What else? So ales are not usually aged. There's no reason to age an ale, really, usually. Maybe a higher alcohol stout or something. But lagers are aged. It's aged differently, though. It's called lagering. The actual act of aging a lager is called lagering. So if you ever hear somebody say, I'm lagering my beer. Basically, what you're doing is you're slowly, like literally every day, you raise the temperature, let's say 1 degree for your lager after it's finished fermenting. So you're slowly raising the temperature. Once it gets up to the proper temperature, you hold it in what's called a diacetyl rest. So diacetyl is a chemical that is produced by the yeast. It gives your beer this sort of buttered corn or buttered popcorn sort of flavor, which normally you don't want. And so the reason for the rest is because what the yeast giveth, the yeast taketh away. So if you let it rest long enough, the yeast will reabsorb the diacetyl that it initially had put into your beer. It'll reabsorb it, but it needs time. And that's the reason why I let my beer sit for a good month before I bottle it in the first place. It just ensures that it gives plenty of time for it to reabsorb any off flavors. Anyway, so that's lagering. And then, of course, there's different varieties of lagers. You've got, Box and Dunkels and Czech lagers and stuff. So there are some varieties, but there are far more varieties of ale. Ale has been around for like 4,000 years, something like that. Very long time, right? It's the OG of beer. Whereas a lager, that's like, 16th century, they discovered this yeast that they could use for lagering. By the way, why would you want a lager? Well, if you ferment at that colder temperature, you end up getting fewer off flavors, and so you get a crisper, cleaner beer out of the whole thing. My personal opinion, and everybody has their right to whatever they prefer. But I prefer an ale 100 times over a lager. To me, a lager is very mundane and plain. They all kind of taste similar to me. They don't have a lot going on. They're not super exciting. Yes, they're crisp. I guess on a real hot day, and you just want something refreshing or something, yeah, I can see that. But it's not like something I would want all the time, because it's just, I mean, all the big companies, I'm going to go off on a little rant here, but all the big beer companies make lagers, right? Budweiser, Miller, Coors, Heineken, anyway, Sapporo. I mean, every country makes a lager. And the reason is because these companies want to make money. And they know that they want to make the beer, or the type of beer, that is going to have the most amount of appeal to the most amount of people to have the largest amount of sales. So they make a lager, and they make it as plain as they can, so that it will appeal to as many people as possible. So they're making, more money. So in my opinion, if you look at it in that light, lagers are sort of, I mean, they're beer, but they're not very exciting to me. That's just my opinion. Let's move on. Well, kind of. Let's move on, kind of, okay? I want to talk about another kind of beer that is actually just a variety of lager, because that's probably the most common category or offshoot of lager, which is Pilsner. So even though, so Pilsner, what is a Pilsner? So Pilsner is a beer that is made in a specific area, kind of like Champagne is made in Champagne, France, and I think Mezcal can only be made in Mezcal, Mexico, that sort of thing. Well, technically a Pilsner has to be made in Pilsen, Czech Republic. That is where it originated, and that's where it gets its name. So the original Pilsner is Pilsner Urquell, if you've ever heard of that one. So if you ever want to try, the real thing, that's what you should go try and taste and see how you like it. Now, I would say a Pilsner is like the lager's version of a pale ale, right? It is more of a sort of bitter, in my opinion, pale type of lager. There is a Czech versus German version. So obviously I was just saying how the Czech version is the original. It's the OG of Pilsner. The variation between the two isn't too much different. The German version is a little bit lighter in color. It's not quite as heavily hopped, so it's a lighter floral flavor. And it's a little bit thinner because the barley is also malted differently. The Czech version, they do something called floor malted barley. You can Google that. I'm not going to go through the details of that, but it is a pretty labor-intensive way to malt your barley. But the Czech version is much more full-bodied, whereas the German version is a much thinner, crisper lager. Okay. Also, by the way, and I'll put a picture up. Ales are served in pretty much any kind of glass. This is an ale, dimpled beer glass. Over in England they have the British pint glass that has the little ridge around it. So it just varies. Pilsner, however, has this very specific glass, and I'll put a picture up probably over here. It starts kind of narrow, and then it opens up wider at the top. Well, I'll put a picture so you can see. But yeah, Pilsner supposedly, and by the way, I don't think it tastes any different. I don't think the glass has anything to do with the flavor. It's just, I don't know, nostalgia? I don't even know how they decided. It'd be interesting historically to figure out, why did they serve it in this type of glass? All right, let's move on. I only have a couple more, and I'm already probably extending this video too long. Let's go to Kolsch. If you watch a lot of videos, you'll see Kolsch, which I could be wrong here, but I believe, gosh, I don't speak German, so I apologize, but I think it's more like Kolsch for the pronunciation. And that's the only time I'm going to say it like that, because I'm sure that it's terrible and not right, and I'll get in trouble from people who speak German. But it's Kolsch. It's spelled K-O with an umlaut, L-S-C-H. So it's a German ale, and that's right, I said ale. So is interesting because it is an ale, and the reason it's an ale is because it's made from ale yeast, but it's kind of a hybrid. It's an ale made in this. It's made in the way you would make a lager, but it's an ale. In fact, I'm considering. I haven't decided yet, but I'm considering maybe trying to make one of these days. So stay around for that. It'll be a while as I have plans upon plans upon plans upon plans, of what I want to make next. So this one would be way down the line, but we'll get there. And it's always nice to have, options. So this Kolsch is specifically from the region of Cologne, Germany. That's its birthplace. So Kolsch is made with specific ingredients, right? So it's made from noble hops. Now, there are different kinds of noble hops, but if you're going to make a Kolsch, it must be made with noble hops, and it must be made with Pilsner malt. Not only must it be made with Pilsner malt, it should be like mostly Pilsner malt. Kolsch is almost a smash beer. A smash beer is a single malt, single hop. So noble hops, Pilsner malt. But you also will oftentimes see another kind of, like, maybe 10% of the build will be wheat or something like that. So that's your traditional Kolsch. It is a hybrid because of the way it's fermented. So you ferment it like you would an ale, because it is an ale yeast. So you have to ferment it at a warmer temperature. When I say warmer, I mean like 68 degrees. It's not like crazy warm. That's Fahrenheit, sorry. So you ferment it like you normally would, and then you're going to age it or lager it. Now, I personally think it's more like cold crashing, but if you want to call it aging, you can call it aging, which is basically you want to chill it down to a colder temperature and hold it there for a period of time, which is the lagering period, right? Supposedly by doing this, it gives it a cleaner, drier taste than most of your other aromatic or fruity beers that are out there. So where did the Kolsch come from? Kolsch was invented on purpose to compete with the Pilsner, which I just talked about. So the Pilsner beer, as we said, was from Pilsen in the former Czech Republic. And this is, of course, the Kolsch is the German version of that Pilsner. So, of course, along those lines, if the Pilsner has to have its own glass, then so does the Kolsch. The Kolsch has its own glasses. It's all one. It doesn't taper or anything. And I don't know how to pronounce the name. In English, it looks like it's called a Strange. However, I'm imagining that in German, it's probably something like Strange. But that's probably not right either. But I imagine that there's got to be a German pronunciation for that particular glass that I don't know how to pronounce. But just know that there's that specific type of glass for a Kolsch. Again, I don't know if it's for nostalgia or just, marketing, but there you go. All right, so I have barely enough time to talk about two more kinds of beer. All right, so we have Saison and Session. They're sort of similar and they're sort of not. And that's why I want to talk about them. The only reason is because you can see them written down or whatever, and if you're not familiar with them, you might think, oh, well, that's the same thing, or they're talking about the same thing, or they're just pronouncing it differently. The reality is, it's two different types of beer. Let's start with Saison. Saison is a French word, so it is a French beer. Actually, it's not really French, right? Well, I mean, it's from a French-speaking country. It's Belgian. It's a Belgian beer, and it is the French word for season, right? So Saison is an ale, so it's brewed with ale yeast, and surprise, surprise, Pilsner malt. So it's very similar in that sense to a Kolsch. As I said, it originated in Belgium. Sometimes it's called a farmhouse ale. The reason being is it was a beer that was made on farms, and that would usually be used, or they usually use whatever local ingredients they had to flavor the beer, whatever kind of grains and stuff they had. And a lot of times they would ferment it with a wild yeast because that's what, they had or whatever. And it was oftentimes brewed during the winter and then drank during the summer. Hence the name Saison or season. And this sort of, well, I won't get to it yet, but it sort of leads into session beer, which is sort of, in my opinion, like the American version of a Saison. I'll get to that in a second. The Saison is also served in a very specific glass, although, again, it's not a requirement. And I will put a picture up there. I don't know that there's a name for this type of glass, but I just call it the tulip-shaped beer glass. I like it so much, though, I think I'm going to try to find one or buy one, just to have one. That'd be fun, I think it's a cool shape. But I oftentimes see like kettle sours served in these tulip-shaped glasses. Anyway, then there's the session beer, which doesn't have to be served in any special glass. It's the American version, in my opinion, of the Saison. It's what we would call a lawnmower beer, which is basically a farmhouse. A lawnmower beer meaning that you could just drink it kind of all day long. It's like a lower ABV, 4 to 5% ABV. It's usually a refreshing light beer. So I don't want to give names away, but there are some people that would say Coors Light is a lawnmower beer, right? It's a session beer. It's just as an example, like session is kind of, in my opinion, such a generic term. You can call a lager a session beer depending on the alcohol content on it and whatnot. But that's what a session beer is. So that's the difference between those two. So listen, that's what I have. I need to cut this short because we're getting too long, and I can't believe you stayed this long into this video. So thank you if you stayed till the end. I appreciate it. You made it. You got here. You're one of the few and the proud. So if you look up, look down, there'll be another link to another video because I'm making one every week. So if you like this video, hit subscribe. You'll be notified each time I post the next video. Hit the thumbs up at the bottom, the like button down there, and it will help my video grow and my channel grow so that other people can find me. And hopefully things can continue to grow and get a bigger community of likewise interested people. So until the next time, thanks for watching, and as always, keep on brewing.